I lost my husband and daughter in an accident and decided to donate their organs to save other lives. Years later, I took a job as a cook in the home of a wealthy family. But when I saw the owner for the first time, my heart almost stopped. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The sidewalk smelled like wet cardboard and old coffee grounds. I pressed my back against the brick wall of the shuttered pharmacy, pulling my coat tighter even though the fabric had worn so thin it barely held warmth anymore. My fingers traced the frayed edge of my pocket where I'd tucked away $3 bills and 47 cents. Everything I had left after buying yesterday's gas station sandwich. I shouldn't have been here. 60 years old, sitting on concrete that soaked cold through my jeans, watching strangers hurry past without meeting my eyes. But life doesn't ask permission before it strips you down to nothing. The eviction notice had given me 72 hours. I'd spent the first day in denial, the second packing what little I owned into 2 garbage bags, and the third standing in that empty studio apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling and wondering how I'd become invisible. The landlord had been apologetic but firm. 3 months behind on rent. No references, no next of kin to call, no one left at all. I closed my eyes and let my head rest against the brick. 15 years ago, I'd had a home, a real one, with William's engineering textbooks stacked on the coffee table and Maya's crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. I'd had a husband who kissed my forehead every morning before work, and a 5-year-old daughter who believed I could fix anything with a Band-Aid and a song. Then a delivery truck ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I lost them both before the sun set. The hospital chaplain had found me in the waiting room late that night, his face carefully neutral. William had died on impact. Maya had held on for 6 hours, her small body broken in ways I still couldn't let myself picture. And then a different doctor had appeared, younger, with tired eyes and a clipboard, asking me the question that would reshape the rest of my life. "Mrs. Brennan, have you and your husband ever discussed organ donation?" I should have said no. I should have told them I needed time, that I couldn't think, that the world had just ended and they were asking me to make decisions about harvesting pieces of the people I loved most. But Maya's favorite book had been about a girl who planted seeds that grew into flowers, and William had always carried his donor card in his wallet, and somehow through the haze of shock and morphine-grade grief, I'd heard myself saying yes. Yes, take his heart. Yes, take her heart. Yes, let something good come from this nightmare. They'd tried to tell me it was a gift, that I was saving lives, but all I felt was hollow. The years after that were a blur of bad decisions and survival mode. I stopped returning calls from William's family. They meant well, but their sympathy felt like pity, and I couldn't bear it. I moved from our house to a smaller apartment, then to a studio, then to a room in a boarding house where the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's television at 3 a.m. I worked where I could, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, washing dishes in restaurant kitchens, but grief made me unreliable. I'd miss shifts, forget tasks, stand in the middle of a room and lose track of time. Depression settled over me like a second skin. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Other days I couldn't stop moving, as if stillness would let the memories catch up. I stopped singing. That was the worst part. I used to sing constantly, while cooking, while folding laundry, while rocking Maya to sleep. Her favorite had been an old lullaby my grandmother taught me, something about stars and safe harbor. After the accident, the melody died in my throat. Now, sitting on this sidewalk in a city that felt too big and too indifferent, I let my eyes drift closed and hummed a few notes under my breath. Just the beginning. Just enough to remember what it felt like to be someone who still believed in comfort. A couple walked past, the woman's perfume expensive and fleeting. A car honked somewhere down the block. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. I hummed a little louder, letting the melody fill the empty spaces. "Excuse me." I opened my eyes. A young woman stood in front of me, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a university hoodie under her jacket. She held a paper coffee cup in one hand and a medical textbook in the other. Her expression wasn't pitying. It was curious, intent, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "That song," she said. "What is it?" I cleared my throat, suddenly self-conscious. Just an old lullaby. My grandmother used to sing it. I know it. Her voice was certain, but there was confusion in her eyes. I mean, I feel like I know it, but I don't know from where. We stared at each other for a moment. Up close, I could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that comes from too many late nights and too much responsibility for someone so young. "Are you okay?" she asked. And the question was so direct, so absent of performative concern, that I almost laughed. "Not really," I admitted. "I got evicted 2 days ago. I'm looking for work, but—" I gestured at myself, at the garbage bags propped against the wall, at the whole pathetic picture. "It's hard to find someone willing to hire you when you look like this." She crouched down, setting her textbook on the ground beside her. "What kind of work?" "Anything. I used to cook. I'm good at it, actually. And I can clean, organize, manage a household. I just need a chance." The young woman bit her lip, thinking. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through something, her expression shifting from thoughtful to decisive. "Our cook died 2 weeks ago," she said. "Heart attack. She'd been with our family for years, and my father hasn't been able to find a replacement. He's not well. He needs someone who can handle meal prep, light housekeeping, maybe some companionship. It's live-in, room and board plus salary." I stared at her. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you an interview." She smiled, and it was genuine. "But honestly, you remind me of someone. I don't know who. And you were singing that song and—" She shook her head. "This is going to sound crazy, but I think you're supposed to come home with me." Hope was a dangerous thing. I'd learned that the hard way. But sitting on that cold sidewalk with nothing but $3 and the clothes on my back, I couldn't afford to be cautious. "Okay," I said. "Okay." She stood and offered me her hand. "I'm Haley." I took it, letting her pull me to my feet. "Elizabeth." "Nice to meet you, Elizabeth." She picked up my garbage bags without hesitation, slinging one over her shoulder. "My car's around the corner. Let's get you somewhere warm." As we walked, I caught myself humming again. Just a few notes, soft and tentative. Haley glanced at me, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. But that was impossible. Wasn't it? Haley's car smelled like vanilla air freshener and old coffee cups. She drove with the focused intensity of someone used to operating on little sleep, navigating through downtown traffic and onto a highway that led out toward the suburbs. I watched the city give way to tree-lined streets and larger houses, the kind with manicured lawns and security systems. "My dad built his business from nothing," Haley said, filling the silence. "Real estate development. He was this force of nature, always working, always planning the next project. Then he got sick, and everything just stopped." "What kind of sick?" "Heart failure. He was on the transplant list for almost 2 years. She glanced at me. "He got his new heart years ago. It saved his life. But he's never been the same. Physically, he's okay. But emotionally, he's different. Quieter. Like he's carrying something heavy." I understood that. I'd been carrying something heavy for 15 years. We turned onto a long driveway that wound through tall oaks. The house at the end was beautiful. Red brick, white columns, windows that gleamed in the afternoon light. It looked like the kind of place where people hosted garden parties and had family portraits taken on the front steps. It looked like a place where I didn't belong. Haley parked and turned off the engine. "He's going to seem distant at first. He doesn't mean to be. He's just processing a lot. But he's a good man. Kind. You'll see." She led me through the front door into a foyer with marble floors and a chandelier that probably cost more than my last year of rent. Everything was clean, tasteful, expensive, and empty. The kind of empty that comes from too many rooms and not enough people to fill them. "Dad?" Haley called out. "I brought someone I want you to meet." Footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. And then he appeared. Edward. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with silver hair and a lean frame that suggested he'd once been broader, stronger. He wore slacks and a button-down shirt, neat but casual, and moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had betrayed him and learned caution. His face was lined, not harshly, but deeply, like he'd spent years squinting into the sun or carrying worry. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were kind, tired. And when they met mine, something passed between us. A flicker of recognition neither of us could name. "This is Elizabeth," Haley said. "She's interviewing for the cook position." Edward studied me for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "Edward Carrington. Elizabeth Brennan." I shook his hand, and his grip was warm, steady, safe. "Why don't we talk in the kitchen?" he suggested. The kitchen was enormous. Granite countertops, professional-grade appliances, an island big enough to serve a dozen people. Haley excused herself to study, leaving Edward and me alone. He gestured for me to sit at the island while he filled a kettle and set it on the stove. "Tea? Please." We sat in silence while the water heated, and I found myself studying him. The way he moved, the small scar on his chest visible through the open collar of his shirt, the gold watch on his wrist that looked old and well-loved. "Haley said you've been having a rough time," Edward said finally. "That's putting it mildly. Do you want to tell me about it?" And there it was, the question I'd been avoiding for years. But something about this man, this quiet kitchen, this unexpected sliver of safety made me want to answer honestly. "I lost my husband and daughter 15 years ago," I said. "Car accident. I've been trying to survive ever since. Not doing a great job of it." Edward's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "I'm sorry." "Me too." The kettle whistled. He poured 2 cups of tea and slid one across the counter to me. We drank in silence, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who understood that some things didn't need explaining. "Can you cook?" he asked eventually. "Yes. I'm good at it." "Can you keep a house running?" "Yes." "Can you tolerate a grumpy old man who's still figuring out how to live in a body that's not entirely his?" I smiled. The first real smile I'd felt in days. "I think so." Edward nodded. "Then the job's yours. Room upstairs, second door on the left. Salary's $1,500 a week, plus food and anything else you need. Start tomorrow." I blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that." He stood, setting his mug in the sink. "Haley has good instincts. And honestly, you look like you need this as much as we do." He was right. But as I followed Haley upstairs to the room that would become mine, clean, bright, with a bed that looked like a cloud, I couldn't shake the feeling that this house held secrets. And somehow, I was part of them. The first morning in the Carrington house, I woke to silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. No traffic noise, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no cold draft from a window that wouldn't close properly. Just soft gray light filtering through cream-colored curtains and the distant sound of birds. I'd slept in my clothes, too disoriented to unpack the garbage bags Haley had left by the dresser. The bed had been almost too comfortable. I'd spent the night half convinced I'd wake up on the sidewalk, that this was just another cruel dream my exhausted mind had conjured. But the room was real. The dove-gray walls, the white furniture, the bathroom with its gleaming fixtures and stack of fresh towels. All real. I stood under the shower for 20 minutes, letting hot water pound against my shoulders until my skin turned pink. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than anything I'd owned in years, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My hair had grown long and wild, more gray than brown now. My face was thinner than it should have been, cheekbones too prominent, lines carved deep around my mouth and eyes. I looked like someone who'd survived something, which I supposed was accurate. I dressed in the cleanest clothes I had, black pants and a plain sweater, and made my way downstairs. The house felt different in daylight, less imposing. Warm light spilled through tall windows, illuminating family photos on the walls. I paused to study them. Edward, younger and vibrant, standing beside a beautiful woman with dark hair and Haley's smile. The same woman holding an infant Haley. A family portrait, all 3 of them, taken maybe 15 years ago. The woman was absent from the more recent photos. In the kitchen, I found a note on the counter in neat handwriting. "Good morning, Elizabeth. Make yourself at home. Coffee's in the cabinet above the pot. I usually eat breakfast around 8. Nothing fancy, whatever you're comfortable making. Edward." I checked the clock. 7:15. Enough time to get my bearings. The kitchen was a cook's dream. I opened cabinets and found them well stocked. Quality ingredients, spices organized alphabetically, baking supplies that suggested someone had once cared deeply about this space. The refrigerator held the basics: eggs, milk, butter, vegetables, some leftover takeout containers that looked a few days old. I started coffee first, the familiar ritual grounding me. Then I pulled out eggs, cheese, mushrooms, spinach. My hands moved automatically, dicing vegetables, whisking eggs, heating a pan. Cooking had always been meditation for me, the one thing that quieted the noise in my head. As the omelet sizzled, I found myself humming. Just a few notes of the lullaby, soft enough that I barely heard it myself. That song again. I spun around. Haley stood in the doorway, dressed in scrubs, her hair damp from a shower. She looked exhausted, like she'd been up all night. "Sorry," I said. "Did I wake you?" "No, I just got home. 36-hour shift at the hospital." She moved to the coffee pot, pouring herself a cup with the desperation of someone who needed it to function. "I'm a fourth-year med student. I'm in one of those accelerated BSMD tracks. I started med school early. Rotations are killing me, but..." She shrugged. "Only a few more months until graduation. What do you want to specialize in?" "Still deciding. I'm leaning toward cardiology or transplant surgery." She took a long drink of coffee. There's something about giving people second chances. New hearts, new lives. It feels important. I turned back to the stove, focusing on the omelet to hide the sudden tightness in my chest. That's admirable. My dad's transplant. That's what got me interested. Seeing him come back from the edge like that. Her voice softened. "He almost died, Elizabeth. And then someone I'll never know made the hardest decision of their life. And he got to live." I slid the omelet onto a plate, added toast, poured orange juice. "Here, you need to eat before you crash." Haley accepted the plate with a grateful smile. She took one bite and closed her eyes. "Oh my God, this is incredible. It's just an omelet. It's the best omelet I've had in months." She took another bite, nearly moaning. Mrs. Chen was good, but she specialized in Chinese cuisine. This is different. Comforting. Edward appeared in the doorway, dressed in slacks and a sweater, hair neatly combed. "Something smells amazing." "Elizabeth made breakfast," Haley said through a mouthful of food. "Dad, you have to try this." I made him the same omelet, hyper-aware of his presence as he settled at the kitchen island. He ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite. When he finished, he set down his fork and met my eyes. "Thank you," he said. "That was perfect." Something about the way he said it, with such sincerity, such quiet gratitude, made my throat tight. I turned away, busying myself with dishes. Haley excused herself to sleep, and Edward lingered, sipping his coffee. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that words weren't always necessary. "I need to run some errands this morning," he said eventually. "Grocery shopping, pharmacy. Would you like to come? You can make a list of anything you need for the kitchen. I can handle the shopping if you'd prefer to rest." "I'd prefer the company." So we went together, Edward driving a sleek sedan through tree-lined streets to an upscale grocery store where everything looked perfect and expensive. He handed me a cart and followed as I moved through the aisles, selecting ingredients with the focus of someone planning battles. "You shop like someone who knows what they're doing," Edward observed. "I used to meal plan for a month at a time. Back when..." I stopped myself. "Back when I had a family to cook for. Tell me about them, if you want." We were standing in the produce section, surrounded by pyramids of apples and pears. I picked up a lemon, testing its weight. William was an engineer, brilliant, patient, kind. He could fix anything. I set the lemon in the cart. Maya was 5. She loved stories and drawing and singing. She was afraid of the dark, so we'd make up songs to help her sleep. "The lullaby you were singing yesterday." "Yes." Edward was quiet for a moment. "I lost my wife 8 years ago. Cancer. She fought for 2 years. And then..." He picked up an apple, examined it, set it back down. Then she was gone. Haley was only 13, too young to lose her mother. I'm sorry. Me too. He moved down the aisle, and I followed. The transplant happened a year after Caroline died. I'd given up, honestly. Stopped taking care of myself, stopped caring if I lived or died. But Haley needed me, so when they called with a match, I said yes. He touched his chest absently, fingers resting over his heart. Do you ever think about the donor? I asked. Every day. His voice was soft. I wear this. He pulled a chain from beneath his sweater, revealing a small pendant. It has the date of my transplant engraved on it. March 15th, 2010. The day someone else's tragedy became my second chance. March 15th, 2010. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the cart handle to steady myself. That was the day William and Maya died. Elizabeth? Edward's hand was on my arm. Are you okay? You're pale. I'm fine, I managed. Just low blood sugar. I should have eaten more breakfast. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. We finished shopping in silence, my mind racing through impossible calculations. But it couldn't be. The odds were astronomical. Hundreds of transplants happened every year. Thousands of people lost loved ones in accidents. It was just a coincidence. Back at the house, I unpacked groceries with shaking hands. Edward disappeared into his study, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I stood at the counter, staring at nothing, trying to calm my racing heart. March 15th, 2010. The worst day of my life. The day I'd signed papers authorizing organ donation while Maya's heart monitor flatlined in the background. I'd been told the recipients were anonymous, that I'd never know who received William's heart, or Maya's, or any of the other organs that had been harvested from their bodies. But Edward had received a heart transplant that day. And Haley, I pulled out my phone and searched. Heart transplant recipients. 2010, March pediatric. The articles were vague, citing patient confidentiality, but one mentioned a 7-year-old girl who'd received an emergency transplant at the same hospital where Maya had died. 7 years old, which would make her 22 now. Haley was 21. Close enough. I set down my phone with trembling hands. This was insane. I was seeing patterns where none existed, connecting dots that shouldn't connect. Grief did that, made you desperate for meaning, for signs that the people you'd lost still mattered somewhere. But then why did Haley recognize the lullaby? Why did she say it felt familiar? Elizabeth? I jumped. Edward stood in the doorway, concern etched across his face. Sorry, I said. Just thinking about dinner. I wanted to ask, would you mind if I worked in here while you cook? I have some paperwork, but I prefer the kitchen to my study. Too quiet in there. Of course, it's your house. He settled at the island with his laptop and a stack of files. I started prep work for chicken piccata, forcing myself to focus on the familiar rhythms of cooking. Pound the chicken, season the flour, heat the oil. But I was hyper-aware of Edward's presence, the way he occasionally looked up from his work to watch me move around the kitchen, the small smile that crossed his face when I started humming again. Unconsciously, automatically. That song, he said suddenly. I know I asked Haley this, but where did you learn it? My grandmother. She was from Ireland. It's an old folk lullaby about safe harbor and stars watching over you. Edward's expression shifted. Surprise, confusion, something deeper. Caroline used to sing something similar to Haley when she was little. I never knew the words, but the melody. He hummed a few notes. They matched mine perfectly. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, the weight of impossible coincidence settling over us like snow. That's strange, I whispered. Yes, Edward agreed. It is. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, but the question hung in the air between us, heavy and unavoidable. What if? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the date on Edward's pendant, March 15th, 2010. The same day the hospital social worker had sat with me in that sterile room, explaining what organ donation meant, asking me to sign forms while my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. At 2 a.m, I gave up and went downstairs. The house was dark except for a light coming from Edward's study. I stood in the hallway, debating whether to retreat, when his voice called out, "Elizabeth, is that you?" I stepped into the doorway. He sat at his desk, still dressed, surrounded by papers and photographs. A glass of whiskey sat untouched at his elbow. "I couldn't sleep either," he said. He gestured to the photos spread across his desk. "I've been looking through old medical records, trying to remember details I'd rather forgotten." I moved closer. The papers were hospital documents, transplant records, pages dense with medical terminology. And there, on one form, I saw it. Donor, anonymous, male, age 40, cause of death, vehicular trauma. William had been 40 when he died. "I never looked at these before," Edward said quietly. "After the surgery, I wanted to move forward. I didn't want to know the details. It felt intrusive, like I was profiting from someone's tragedy." He looked up at me. "But that song today, and the date, I can't stop thinking about it." I sat down in the chair across from him, my legs suddenly unsteady. "What hospital did you have your transplant at?" "St. Catherine's, downtown. The same hospital where William and Maya had died." "What time?" My voice was barely a whisper. Edward shuffled through papers, found what he was looking for. "Surgery started at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th. The heart arrived at 11:20 p.m. He met my eyes. "The donor died earlier that day." "What time did the donor die?" "It doesn't say exactly. Just lists the date as March 15th. He paused. "Why are you asking me this, Elizabeth?" I should have stayed silent. I should have made an excuse and gone back to my room. But something in me needed to know. Needed to either confirm or destroy this impossible theory. "My husband died on March 15th, 2010, I said. "At St. Catherine's Hospital. He was 40 years old. The cause of death was a car accident." The color drained from Edward's face. "He was an organ donor," I continued, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I authorized the donation at 9:15 that evening. His heart, his kidneys, his liver, everything that could save someone else." Edward stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. He paced to the window, one hand pressed against his chest, against the scar I knew was there, the one I'd glimpsed through his open collar. "My daughter was in the car too," I whispered. "Maya. She was 5 years old. She survived the initial impact, but—" My throat closed. Even after 15 years, I couldn't say it easily. Her injuries were too severe. She held on for 6 hours, long enough for me to say goodbye. And then I signed the forms for her too. "Jesus Christ." Edward's voice was ragged. He turned to face me, and there were tears on his face. "Elizabeth, I need to know if it's possible," I said. "I need to know if you have my husband's heart." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled out his phone, fingers flying over the screen. "My surgeon, Dr. Patricia Walsh, she might still have records. She told me once that if I ever wanted to know more about the donor, she'd help me navigate the process." He looked at me. "But it takes time. There are protocols, privacy laws." "How much time?" "Days. Maybe weeks." I nodded, feeling numb. "And Haley, when did she have her transplant?" Edward's hand stilled on his phone. "A few hours after mine, just after midnight on March 16th. She'd been on the list for 8 months. Cardiomyopathy. Her heart was failing, and we were running out of time. Then the call came, just hours after I got mine. They said a pediatric heart had become available, a perfect match." His voice cracked. "I was in recovery when they wheeled her into surgery. I couldn't even be there with her." "How old was she?" "She'd just turned 7 the month before. Maya had been 5. Too young. But organ donation for children, they didn't always match exact ages. What mattered was size, blood type, tissue compatibility." "Edward," I said carefully, "has Haley ever mentioned anything unusual? Dreams, memories that don't make sense?" "What do you mean?" "Cellular memory. It's controversial, not widely accepted, but there are documented cases of transplant recipients experiencing memories or preferences from their donors." I stood, moving closer to him. "The lullaby, Edward. Why does Haley know that song?" He stared at me, understanding dawning. "You think—" "I sang that song to Maya every night. When she was scared, when she couldn't sleep, when she needed comfort. It was our song. And Haley recognized it. This is insane. I know. It's impossible. I know that too. We stood there in his study, two people bound by grief and the terrible weight of possibility. Outside, the night was silent except for the sound of wind moving through trees. "I'll call Dr. Walsh first thing in the morning," Edward said finally. "But Elizabeth, if this is true, if you really are—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "The woman who gave you permission to take pieces of my family," I said softly. "I know. That's not what I was going to say." He reached out, hesitated, then gently took my hand. His palm was warm, his grip steady. "I was going to say, the woman who saved my life, who saved Haley's life, who gave us 15 years we wouldn't have had otherwise." Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them. They died so alone, Edward, in pain and scared, and I couldn't protect them. I couldn't save them. The only thing I could do was sign those goddamn papers. "You did save them." His voice was fierce. "Not their bodies, their legacy, their meaning. Do you know what it's like to live with a stranger's heart beating in your chest? Every day I wake up grateful. Every day I try to be worthy of the gift someone gave me." He squeezed my hand. "If that someone was your husband, if this heart belonged to him, then I've been carrying a piece of him for 15 years, keeping him alive in the only way possible." I pulled my hand away and wrapped my arms around myself. "I need to be alone. Elizabeth, please." He nodded, stepping back. "If you need anything." But I was already walking away, back up the stairs to my room, closing the door and sinking onto the bed. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I'd just learned. William's heart might be beating in Edward's chest. Maya's heart might be beating in Haley's. The people I'd lost might be here, in this house, living in borrowed time. Morning came too soon. I heard Haley's footsteps in the hallway around 7, then Edward's voice, low and serious. They were talking. About me, probably. About what I'd told him last night. I forced myself out of bed, showered, dressed. When I went downstairs, they were both in the kitchen. Haley sat at the island with coffee and textbooks. Edward stood by the window, phone in hand. They both looked up when I entered, and the concern in their faces was almost unbearable. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What would you like for breakfast?" "Elizabeth." Haley set down her coffee cup. "Dad told me. About your family, about the dates." I moved to the coffee pot, focusing on the simple task of pouring a cup. "It's probably just a coincidence." "Is it?" She stood and crossed to me. Up close, I could see William's eyes. That same deep brown, that same warmth. Or maybe I was just desperate to see him anywhere I could. Because I've been thinking about that song all night. And the more I think about it, the more I remember. Remember what? Being little. Really little. And someone singing to me in the dark. A woman's voice, soft and safe. My mom died when I was 13, so I know it wasn't her in those memories. She had a different voice, more soprano. This voice was lower, comforting. Haley's eyes were bright with unshed tears. And there are other things. Foods I've always loved that my parents never made. A fear of red trucks that no one could explain. Dreams about a house with yellow shutters. Our house had yellow shutters. "Dad said you authorized donations for both your husband and daughter," Haley continued. "My transplant started just after midnight on March 16th, 2010, only a few hours after Dad's. I was 7. Your daughter was 5. That's within the acceptable range for pediatric heart transplants." "We don't know anything for certain," Edward interjected. He crossed to us, his expression gentle but firm. "I called Dr. Walsh. She's pulling records, but it'll take a few days. We need to be patient." "I don't want to be patient." Haley's voice shook. If her daughter," she pressed a hand to her chest, over her heart, "then I've been alive because of her, because of a choice she made on the worst day of her life." The tears came before I could stop them. Haley's arms were around me immediately, holding me while I sobbed against her shoulder. She smelled like vanilla and coffee and something indefinably young. She felt solid and real and alive. And if this was true, if she carried Maya's heart, then my daughter had grown had become this beautiful, brilliant young woman studying to save other lives. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" Haley pulled back, gripping my shoulders. "For giving me a chance to live? For making an impossible choice so I could grow up and go to college and become a doctor? Elizabeth, if this is real, you're the reason I'm standing here." Edward's hand rested on my back, warm and steady. "We're going to figure this out together," he said. "Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together." I looked between them. This man with his quiet strength and devastating kindness, this young woman with her fierce intelligence and tender heart, and felt something shift inside me. For 15 years I'd been hollow, empty, wandering through life like a ghost, convinced I'd lost everything that mattered, but maybe I hadn't lost them. Maybe they'd been here all along, waiting for me to find my way home. "Okay," I whispered. "Together." Haley smiled through her tears and squeezed my hand, and somewhere deep in her chest, I swear I felt an answering beat. Dr. Patricia Walsh's office was located in a medical complex adjacent to St. Catherine's Hospital, the same building where I'd signed those donation forms 15 years ago. I hadn't been back since. Walking through those glass doors felt like stepping into a nightmare I'd tried desperately to forget. Edward must have sensed my hesitation because his hand found mine, squeezing gently. "We don't have to do this if you're not ready." "I'm ready." I wasn't sure if that was true, but I said it anyway. Haley had wanted to come, but she'd had an exam she couldn't miss. Before leaving the house that morning, she'd hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Whatever Dr. Walsh says," she'd whispered against my shoulder, "nothing changes how I feel about you. You understand that, right?" I'd nodded, not trusting my voice. Now, sitting in Dr. Walsh's waiting room with its bland landscape paintings and year-old magazines, I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. The last time I'd been in this building, I'd been a different person. A wife, a mother, someone who still believed the world made sense. "Mr. Carrington?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Walsh is ready for you." We followed her down a corridor to an office that smelled like coffee and antiseptic. Dr. Walsh stood when we entered. A woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She shook Edward's hand warmly, then turned to me. "You must be Elizabeth. Edward told me about your situation." Her voice was kind but professional. "Please, sit." We settled into chairs across from her desk. Dr. Walsh opened a thick manila folder, and I caught glimpses of medical records, consent forms, pages dense with technical language. "I've reviewed both transplant files from March 2010, she began, Edwards and Haley's. "I've also pulled the donor records within the constraints of patient confidentiality laws." She looked at me directly. "Elizabeth, I need to ask you some questions. Your husband's full name?" "William James Brennan." "Date of birth?" "June 3rd, 1970. She made a note. "And your daughter?" "Maya Elizabeth Brennan, born December 18th, 2004. Dr. Walsh's pen paused. She looked down at her papers, then back up at me, and something in her expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, of confirmation. "The accident occurred on March 15th, 2010. I continued, my voice mechanical. "A delivery truck ran a red light at the intersection of 5th and Maple around 3:30 p.m. William died at the scene. Maya was transported to St. Catherine's emergency room. She was pronounced brain dead at 9:02 p.m. on March 15th. I authorized organ donation at 9:15 p.m. the same night. The office was silent, except for the ticking of a wall clock. "Edward," Dr. Walsh said carefully, "your donor was William James Brennan. The heart was procured at 10:45 p.m. and transplanted into your chest at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th, 2010. Edward's hand found mine again, gripping tight. "And Haley?" My voice cracked on her name. Dr. Walsh met my eyes with a compassion that told me everything before she spoke. Maya Elizabeth Brennan's heart was transplanted into Haley Grace Carrington at 2:33 a.m. on March 16th, 2010. She was 7 years old. Your daughter was 5, but the size compatibility was excellent. It was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It was one of the most successful pediatric transplants I've ever performed." The room spun. I felt Edward's arm around my shoulders, heard his voice saying my name, but it sounded distant, underwater. All I could think was, Maya's heart. Haley has Maya's heart. Elizabeth, breathe. Dr. Walsh was suddenly beside me, pressing a glass of water into my hands. Slow breaths, in and out. I focused on breathing, on the cool glass against my palms, on Edward's solid presence beside me. Gradually, the room stopped spinning. I'm okay, I managed. I'm okay. Doctor. Walsh returned to her seat but kept her expression gentle. I know this is overwhelming. In my 30 years as a transplant surgeon, I've never seen a donor family and recipient family come together like this. Completely by chance, 15 years later. It doesn't feel like chance, Edward said quietly. No, Dr. Walsh agreed. It doesn't. She pulled out several photographs from the folder. Medical images, I realized. Chest x-rays, surgical records. Both transplants were textbook perfect. William's heart adapted to Edward's body with minimal rejection. Maya's heart, she smiled. That little heart has been beating strong in Haley's chest for 15 years. It's carried her through high school, college, medical school. It's never failed her. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. She would have been 20 now. Maya would have been 20. In a way, she is. Dr. Walsh's voice was gentle but firm. Not in body, but in legacy. Elizabeth, your daughter's heart has lived a beautiful life. It's learned to love medicine, to help others. It's run marathons. Did you know Haley runs? It's laughed and cried and experienced joy. Everything that heart has felt, your daughter made possible. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to contain the sob building in my chest. And William, Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. His heart let me walk Haley down the aisle at her college graduation. It let me hold her when her mother died. It let me rebuild my relationship with her when I was too wrapped up in work to be the father she needed. He turned to me. Your husband gave me the time to become a better man. I stood abruptly. I need some air. I made it to the hallway before the sobs came in earnest. I leaned against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the cold floor, crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. 15 years of grief poured out. All the birthdays Maya would never have. All the conversations with William I'd never get to finish. All the emptiness and loss and unbearable absence. But mixed with the grief was something else. Something I hadn't expected. Relief. They hadn't died for nothing. Their deaths had meaning, purpose. William's heart had saved Edward's life. Maya's heart had given Haley her future. And now, impossibly, I'd found them again. Edward sat down beside me on the floor, not speaking, just being present. We stayed there until my tears subsided, until I could breathe normally again. I don't know how to feel, I admitted. I'm grateful and devastated and angry and... I laughed. The sound edged with hysteria. I'm so fucking confused. That's allowed, Edward said. All of it's allowed. Dr. Walsh appeared in the hallway, concern etched on her face. I've called for some counseling resources. There are therapists who specialize in donor family and recipient relationships. This is complicated territory. What happens now? I asked. That's up to you. She crouched down to our level. Some donor families want ongoing relationships with recipients. Others prefer distance. There's no right answer, Elizabeth. You get to decide what you need. I looked at Edward. What do you want? I want you to stay, he said without hesitation. Not as our cook? As family. As someone who belongs with us. His voice dropped. I want to learn everything about William. What he loved, what he dreamed about, how he took his coffee. I want to honor him properly. And Haley? Haley already loves you. I saw it the first night you came to our house. There's a connection between you two that I couldn't explain then. But it makes sense now. He helped me to my feet. We're not trying to replace your family, Elizabeth. We could never do that. But maybe we can be something new. Something that honors what you lost while building something meaningful for the future. When we got back to the house, Haley's car was already in the driveway. We found her in the kitchen, pacing, her phone clutched in her hand. She looked up when we entered, and I saw the fear in her eyes. Well? She asked, her voice small. It's true, Edward said gently. Elizabeth's husband was my donor. And your heart? Came from her daughter. Haley's hand pressed against her chest. Oh my God! Oh my God! I have her daughter's heart. She looked at me, and I saw her struggling with the same overwhelming confusion I felt. Then she crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and threw her arms around me. Thank you. She sobbed into my shoulder. Thank you for choosing life when you had every reason to choose anything else. Thank you for my heart, for my future, for everything. I held her while she cried, stroking her hair, and found myself humming without thinking. The lullaby, soft and instinctive. Haley froze. That's it. That's the song from my dreams. I sang it to Maya every night, I whispered, when she was scared, when she needed to sleep. Sing it now, Haley pleaded. Please, I need to hear it. So I sang, my voice cracking but steady, the Irish lullaby my grandmother had taught me and I'd passed to my daughter. About stars watching over you, about safe harbor in storms, about love that never dies. Halfway through, Haley joined in. She didn't know the words, but she knew the melody, hummed it in perfect pitch, in perfect time, as if the song had been written into her bones, or her heart. When the last note faded, we stood there in the kitchen, the 3 of us bound together by something deeper than blood, stronger than chance. I don't understand how this works, Haley said finally. Cellular memory, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, but I know what I feel. And I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. Me too, I admitted. From the moment I heard you singing on that sidewalk, something in me recognized you. Edward wrapped his arms around both of us. We're family now, he said firmly. Whatever that means, however we define it, we're family. And standing there in that warm kitchen, held by these 2 people who carried the hearts of those I'd lost, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. Home. But even as relief flooded through me, a small voice whispered a warning. Be careful. You've lost everything before. You could lose it again. I pushed the thought away and held on tighter. The weeks that followed felt like learning to walk on new legs. Every morning I woke in that beautiful room, half convinced it was a dream. Every morning, reality settled back in. William's heartbeat in Edward's chest. Maya's heartbeat in Haley's. And I was here, not as hired help, but as something far more complicated. Family. Edward insisted I stop cooking as an employee. You're not our cook anymore, he said one morning over coffee. You're you, part of this household. If you want to cook because you enjoy it, that's different. But I'm not paying you to do it. Then what am I doing here? He'd looked at me with those gentle eyes. William's eyes, I sometimes thought. Though that was impossible. Living, healing, being present. So I learned to live in this house without the shield of employment. I cooked because I loved it, because feeding people was how I showed care, but I also learned to accept care in return. Haley brought me coffee in the mornings before her hospital shifts. Edward invited me to join him on walks through the neighborhood. We ate dinner together every night, the 3 of us, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. Edward told me about William's heart, how it had felt at first, foreign and strange, beating with a rhythm that wasn't his own. How he'd had panic attacks in the early months, convinced his body would reject this intruder. How gradually, over time, the heart had become his own. But I think part of William's still here, he admitted one evening. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun set through the trees. I never used to like jazz. Now I can't get enough of it. And sometimes I'll wake up with technical problems solving themselves in my dreams, engineering solutions for issues I don't even understand. William loved jazz, I said softly. Miles Davis especially. And he was always solving problems in his sleep. He'd wake me up at 3 in the morning, excited about some equation he'd figured out. Edward smiled. Maybe his heart remembers. Haley's connection to Maya was even more pronounced. She showed me her sketchbooks one afternoon. Hundreds of drawings, detailed and beautiful, that she'd been making since childhood. I don't know where this came from, she said, flipping through pages of flowers, landscapes, portraits. My mom couldn't draw at all. Dad's hopeless at anything artistic. But I've always felt this need to create, to put things on paper. Maya had loved drawing. Our refrigerator had been covered with her crayon masterpieces. And the dreams, Haley continued, her voice dropping. They're so vivid, Elizabeth. Dreams about a yellow house with a tire swing in the backyard. A woman's voice reading stories about a girl who plants magical seeds. A man who smells like sawdust and coffee, lifting me onto his shoulders. I pressed my hand to my mouth. We'd had a tire swing. William had built it himself, hung it from the old oak tree. And Maya's favorite book had been about a girl who planted seeds that grew into different worlds. She's still here, Haley whispered, touching her chest. Isn't she? Some part of her is still here. I think so, I managed. I hope so. But hope was a dangerous thing. I'd learned that the hard way. 2 months after Dr. Walsh confirmed the transplant connection, Edward asked me to dinner, not in the house, but at a restaurant downtown. A real restaurant, with white tablecloths and wine lists and waiters in pressed shirts. Is this a date? I asked, only half joking. Do you want it to be? I didn't know how to answer that. Edward was handsome, kind, intelligent, everything any reasonable woman would want. But he also carried my husband's heart, and that complicated things in ways I couldn't begin to untangle. Let's just call it dinner between friends, I said finally. He smiled, but I caught the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. The restaurant was elegant, but not pretentious. We ordered wine and pasta, and for the first hour, conversation flowed easily. Edward told me about his business, how he'd built it from nothing, how he was now trying to step back and let younger partners take the lead. I told him about my life before William, about growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, about my grandmother who'd taught me to cook and sing. But eventually, we circled back to the question neither of us could avoid. What are we doing, Elizabeth? Edward asked, setting down his wine glass. I don't mean dinner. I mean all of this. Living together, building this connection. Where does it go? I don't know. I care about you. His voice was steady but vulnerable. More than I probably should given the circumstances. But I can't pretend these feelings don't exist. My heart clenched. Edward, I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted gently. I just need you to know. You're not an obligation or a responsibility. You're someone I look forward to seeing every morning. Someone who makes me laugh. Someone who understands grief in a way most people don't. He reached across the table, his hand open, offering. Someone I could fall in love with if you'd let me. I stared at his hand, at the strong fingers and the small scar on his wrist from an IV line years ago. If I took that hand, I'd be choosing something new. Something that honored William's memory while acknowledging he was gone. Something that felt like betrayal and healing in equal measure. I took his hand. I care about you too, I admitted. But I'm terrified, Edward. I've lost everything once. If I let myself love you, if I let myself believe in this, what happens if it's taken away? I can't promise it won't be, he said honestly. I have a heart that's already failed once. Transplant recipients don't always get fairy tale endings. But I can promise that whatever time we have, I'll spend it trying to make you happy. We sat there, hands joined across the table, navigating the impossible space between grief and hope. I need time, I said finally. Take all the time you need. But time had other plans. 3 weeks later, I woke to the sound of movement downstairs. Hurried footsteps, voices raised in concern. I threw on a robe and rushed down to find Haley supporting Edward, his face gray with pain, one hand pressed against his chest. What happened? He woke up with chest pains, Haley said, her medical training taking over. We're going to the ER, now. I grabbed my shoes and followed them to the car. Haley drove with controlled urgency while I sat in the back with Edward, holding his hand, watching his labored breathing. I'm fine, he gasped. Just probably indigestion. Shut up, Dad, Haley said not unkindly. Let me do the diagnosing. At St. Catherine's emergency room, they took him immediately. Haley flashed her medical student credentials and talked to the attending physician in rapid medical terminology I couldn't follow. I stood in the waiting room, arms wrapped around myself, feeling time collapse. I'd been in this hospital before, 15 years ago, standing in a different waiting room, being told my family was gone. Not again, I thought desperately. Please, not again. Haley found me 2 hours later. He's stable. They're running tests, but it looks like a mild episode of rejection. His body's reacting to the transplant. It happens sometimes, even years later. Is he going to be okay? They're adjusting his immunosuppressants. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but... She paused, and I saw the fear beneath her professional composure. Elizabeth, rejection episodes can be managed, but they're serious. If his body keeps fighting the heart... She didn't need to finish. I understood. Can I see him? She led me back to his room. Edward lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. But he smiled when I entered. Hey, sorry about the drama. I sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand. Don't apologize for being human. I'm supposed to take you to that art gallery next week. Haley got us tickets. The gallery will still be there when you're better. He squeezed my hand. Elizabeth, earlier, at dinner when I said I could fall in love with you, I lied. His eyes held mine. I've already fallen. Completely. And I know the timing's terrible, and I know this complicates everything. But I need you to know. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. My voice was fierce. You're going to get through this, and we're going to have more time. Years. Decades. You can't promise that. Watch me. He laughed, wincing at the pain it caused. Stubborn woman. You have no idea. They kept him for 3 days. I barely left the hospital, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, drinking terrible coffee, watching monitors like they held the secrets of the universe. Haley divided her time between her rotations and her father's bedside, and I saw the toll it took on her, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. On the 3rd evening, after the doctors confirmed Edward could go home, I found Haley in the hospital chapel. She sat in the front pew, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I slid in beside her and put my arm around her. I can't lose him, she choked out. I can't. He's all I have left. You have me too, I said softly. You have me, Haley. She turned and buried her face against my shoulder, crying with the abandon of someone who'd been holding it together too long. I held her, rocking slightly, and found myself humming the lullaby. Gradually, her sobs subsided. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm supposed to be the strong one, the medical professional who keeps it together. You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to be human. I brushed hair back from her face. Such a maternal gesture that it surprised us both. Maya would be so proud of you. The woman you've become. The doctor you're going to be. You're everything I would have wanted for her. I feel her sometimes, Haley whispered. When I'm in surgery, watching a heart transplant, I feel this overwhelming sense of purpose. Like this is what I was meant to do. Like she's guiding me. Then let her guide you. Let her make you brave. We sat together in that quiet chapel, 2 women bound by impossible circumstances, finding strength in each other. And somewhere in my chest, in the place where my own heart beat, I felt something shift. I'd spent 15 years running from love, from connection, from anything that could hurt me again. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to let myself believe in second chances, not just for Edward and Haley, but for myself. 6 months after Edward's rejection episode, Haley graduated from medical school. The ceremony was held in a grand auditorium filled with proud families, and I sat in the front row beside Edward, watching her cross the stage in her cap and gown. When they called her name, Dr. Haley Grace Carrington, I cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, shaking sobs that I couldn't contain. Edward's arm came around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, letting the grief and joy tangle together. Maya would have been 21 next month, I whispered. I know. Edward kissed my temple. But look what her heart is doing. Look at the life it's living. After the ceremony, we took Haley to dinner at the restaurant where Edward had first told me he was falling in love. She was radiant, laughing, talking about her plans to specialize in transplant surgery. to give other families the second chances we'd been given. "I want to work with donor families," she said, her eyes bright with purpose. "I want to help them understand that their loved ones live on, that the decision to donate, it changes everything." "It does," I agreed quietly. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I've been thinking about going public with our story." Edward and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" "The media, advocacy work, speaking at hospitals and schools about organ donation." Haley's voice was passionate, urgent. "Elizabeth, do you know how many people die waiting for transplants because there aren't enough donors? How many families never get the chance we got? If we shared our story, all three of us, we could save lives." I felt my chest tighten. "Haley, that's asking a lot. To put our grief, our private tragedy on display for strangers. I know it's hard, but think about it. A mother who lost her husband and daughter, who made the impossible choice to donate their organs. A father who received a second chance at life. A daughter who grew up to become a transplant surgeon because of the heart beating in her chest." She squeezed my hand. "We're proof that organ donation works, that it matters. People need to hear that." Edward was quiet, thoughtful. "What would it involve?" "Interviews, probably. Maybe speaking engagements at medical conferences, donor awareness events. There's a documentary filmmaker I met through the hospital who's interested in telling transplant stories." Haley looked between us. "But only if you're both comfortable. I won't do this without your consent." I thought about Maya, about the 5-year-old girl who'd loved drawing and stories and singing. About William, who'd believed in helping others, who'd carried that donor card because he thought it was the right thing to do. They'd wanted their lives to matter, and now they could, in ways I'd never imagined. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." The documentary crew came to the house in September. They set up cameras and lights in the living room, transforming our home into a film set. The director, a woman named Sarah Chen with kind eyes and an easy manner, interviewed each of us separately first. She asked me about the accident, about the moment I'd authorized donation, about the years of grief that followed. I told her everything. The depression, the jobs I'd lost, becoming homeless, sitting on that sidewalk singing a lullaby to keep from disappearing entirely. "What made you keep going?" Sarah asked. I thought about that. I don't know if I was keeping going exactly. I was just existing, surviving, until the day Haley found me. I smiled. And then everything changed. They filmed Edward talking about his heart failure, the transplant, the guilt he'd carried for years about living on someone else's tragedy. They filmed Haley discussing cellular memory, the dreams and preferences that seemed to come from her donor, her decision to become a transplant surgeon. And then they filmed the three of us together, sitting in the kitchen where so much of our story had unfolded. "How does it feel?" Sarah asked, "knowing that you're connected in this way?" Haley spoke first. "It feels like destiny, like everything that happened, the accident, the transplants, Elizabeth finding her way to our home. It was all leading here, to this moment. It feels like grace," Edward said, "undeserved but profound. I get to know the man whose heart I carry. I get to honor him by living well, by loving his wife." He paused, looking at me, "by trying to be worthy of what he gave me." I couldn't speak for a moment. Then, "It feels like coming home. I spent 15 years believing I'd lost everything. But William and Maya, they brought me here. Their hearts remembered me and they called me back." Sarah's eyes were wet behind the camera. "That's beautiful." The documentary, titled "The Hearts That Found Their Way Home," premiered 6 months later at a film festival in New York. We flew out for the screening, Edward, Haley, and me, and sat in a packed theater watching our story unfold on screen. It was harder than I'd expected, seeing footage of the accident site, hearing my own voice describe losing William and Maya. But it was also cathartic, transformative. When the lights came up, the audience gave us a standing ovation. Afterward, people approached us, transplant recipients, donor families, medical professionals. They thanked us for sharing our story, for giving them hope, for showing that beauty could emerge from tragedy. One woman, probably in her 50s, gripped my hands with tears streaming down her face. My son died 2 years ago. Motorcycle accident. I authorized donation, but I've been drowning in regret, wondering if I did the right thing. She looked at Haley. Seeing her, seeing what your daughter's heart has accomplished, it helps. It really helps. I held her while she cried and felt William and Maya smiling somewhere. The documentary went viral. News outlets picked up our story. We were invited to speak at medical conferences, donor awareness events, high schools. Haley started a nonprofit focused on transplant advocacy. Edward donated substantial funds to organ donation research, and I found my voice. I'd spent 15 years silent, invisible, convinced my story didn't matter. But standing in front of audiences, sometimes 20 people, sometimes 200, talking about love and loss and second chances, I discovered something. I was stronger than I'd believed, and my grief had value. It could help others navigate their own darkness. One evening, after a speaking engagement at a hospital in Chicago, Edward and I walked along the waterfront. It was late October, the air crisp with autumn, the city lights reflecting off the dark water. "I'm proud of you," Edward said. "You've become an advocate, a voice for donor families. You're saving lives, Elizabeth." "We're saving lives," I corrected. "All three of us." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "I need to ask you something." My heart kicked against my ribs. "Okay. I know this is complicated. I know I'm carrying your husband's heart, and that makes this, us, something unconventional. But Elizabeth," he took both my hands in his, "I love you. I've loved you since the day you made that omelet and hummed that lullaby. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy. Will you marry me?" I stared at him. This man who'd appeared in my life like an answer to a prayer I'd been too broken to speak. This man whose chest held William's heart, whose house held Maya's heart, whose presence had given me back my life. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Edward. I'll marry you." He kissed me there on the waterfront, gentle and reverent, and I felt William's blessing in the steady beat of Edward's heart against my chest. We married in the spring, in the backyard of the house that had become our home. It was a small ceremony, just close friends, Haley and Dr. Patricia Walsh, who'd brought us together in the most impossible way. Haley stood as my maid of honor, wearing a blue dress that matched her eyes, Maya's eyes. During the ceremony, when the minister asked who gave me away, Haley spoke. "The woman who gave me life twice, once through birth, and once through the gift of her daughter's heart, gives herself freely today, and I give her my blessing, my love, and my gratitude for everything she's sacrificed and everything she's become." I couldn't stop crying. Happy tears, healing tears, tears that washed away 15 years of grief and guilt and emptiness. When Edward slipped the ring on my finger, he whispered, "William would have liked this. I can feel it." And maybe he could. Maybe that generous heart knew that love didn't diminish with sharing, that Elizabeth Brennan deserved happiness, that second chances were worth taking. 5 years later, on a bright March morning, Haley called us into the living room. She'd been working double shifts at the hospital, completing her surgical residency, and we rarely saw her anymore. But today she'd taken time off, her face flushed with excitement. "I have news," she announced. 2 pieces of news, actually. Edward and I sat on the couch, holding hands. We'd settled into our life together, comfortable, loving, aware that every day was borrowed time, but determined to live it fully. "First," Haley said, "I've been asked to lead the new transplant program at St. Catherine's. I'll be the youngest director they've ever had." "Haley, that's incredible." I jumped up to hug her. "I accepted on one condition, that we name the program after Maya Elizabeth Brennan. The Maya Brennan Transplant Center. Every person who receives a heart there will know her story, will understand the sacrifice that made their second chance possible." I couldn't speak. Edward's arm came around me, supporting me. "And second," Haley continued, her voice softer now, "I'm getting married. Her name is Claire. She's a pediatric oncologist. And I want you both to be there when I tell her about our family, about where my heart came from, about the grandmother who gave me everything." Grandmother, I repeated, the word catching in my throat. What else would I call you? Haley smiled through tears. You're Maya's mother. Maya's heart beats in my chest. That makes you my grandmother in every way that matters. I crossed the room and held her. This brilliant young woman who carried my daughter's heart, who'd built a life of purpose and love on the foundation of tragedy transformed. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. Maya would be so proud. She is, Haley said with certainty. I feel it every day. That evening, Edward and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset. The trees had bloomed, filling the air with the scent of new growth. Birds sang their evening songs. The world turned, indifferent and beautiful. We did it, Edward said quietly. We built something good from the worst day of your life. We did, I agreed. Not alone. William and Maya helped. Their hearts led us here. Do you still miss them? Every day, every moment. I leaned my head on his shoulder. But the missing doesn't hurt the way it used to. It's softer now, like an old scar that aches in cold weather, but doesn't stop you from living. Edward kissed my hair. I love you, Elizabeth Carrington. I love you too. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Inside the house, Haley was making dinner, singing as she cooked. The old Irish lullaby, passed from my grandmother to me, from me to Maya, from Maya's heart to Haley's voice. The song of safe harbor, the song of stars watching over you, the song of love that never truly dies. And somewhere in the space between grief and joy, loss and love, ending and beginning, I felt William and Maya smiling. Their hearts had found their way home, and so had I.